So welcome everybody to this second session of the Biophotonics Workshop. We're going to be learning all about the Biophotonics team at Tyndall National Institute, where the team is centrally based. So we have talks from Professor Stefan Andersson-Engels and his team to tell you all about the exciting work that we do here. So I'll hand you over to Stefan.
Thank you very much, Katrina. So most welcome to this webinar. So this is part of this Biophotonics workshop that some of you attend, and we're trying to give a little bit of background of what we are doing at Tyndall in biophotonics. So this is what I will try to focus on. So doing that and having my keys to work. Now it's working again. So trying to do that. So what I would like you to take with you from this presentation is, what is biophotonics? And biophotonics, I can already now tell you that is how you use photonics. That means optics in biology or medical sciences. So why do we have biophotonics at Tyndall National Institute? And what are the opportunities of researchers in this field? So what are we going to work, or what are we working on in the more clinical aspects of it and more fundamental aspects of it? So this is what I hope that you will understand a bit more after this presentation. So where are we and why are we here? So actually it started with Tyndall, or IPIC, the Photonics Center at Tyndall. They figured that being one of the most successful photonic centers in Europe, that they were actually lacking competency in biophotonics. And that's when they recruited me to try to build up an activity in this field. So IPIC being one of these very, very good research centers in Ireland, but also in Europe, actually, one of the better photonic centers in Europe, most successful ones, with more than 200 researchers today. But it's located at Tyndall National Institute in Cork. So Tyndall is an ICT institute, national institute, with about 600 people employed and growing quickly. So Tyndall has a vision to be twice that size in 5 years' time or so. So it's really, really research that is impactful and important for Ireland, and a lot of resources goes into that type of research. And Tyndall is part of UCC, so it's part of the academic world in Ireland, but it's also a standalone national institute. So this is the context that we are working in biophotonics here. Being part of one of the most successful photonic center, being part of one of the biggest national institutes in Ireland, and being part of the academic structure in Ireland as well. So when moving here, what we would like to do is to do very impactful research, something that is important to Ireland and to the world. We also would like to do research that has a very high scientific excellence. And we would like to, of course, work with the best people that we could accomplish. And then you ask yourself, what is most important? Is it the team, the science, or the impact? And I would 100 days out of 100 say the team is the most important. And we have a phenomenal team today. We are 40 people strong. So actually the biggest team at IPIC right now and at Tyndall. And that's fantastic. It's a very diverse team. It's 40 people, as I said, and it's about 20 nationalities. And we are gender equal almost, at least within the 40–60% range. So I think this is a fantastic team. And we also have a very, very strong collaborators that we do work with. But of course, having that team, then you can accomplish very, very good research. and impactful research. So this is what I will try to discuss a little bit today. But I will take a few slides just to give a little bit of introduction to where we are and why we are here. So just taking one example, Sana you met yesterday in the webinar that we had yesterday. So he's coming from India. He did his master there. He was top of his class, very, very strong candidate to do research. He received one of the Marie Curie fellowship to move to Milan and make his PhD there. He worked with photon time-of-flight spectroscopy and diffuse Raman spectroscopy for medical applications. So very, very good thesis he accomplished there. And then we recruited him to come to Cork, and he's now part of a team, as you've seen already. So he's one of the 40 people. He's also the one that started Biophotonics. So it's a small company that is created out of the research that we do at IPIC. And talking about the team, so that is very important, but also the collaborators are very, very important. And we're collaborating with people across the entire world, from North America, where we have a few examples there, to Europe, where we have a number of examples. We're working with quite a few people, and to Asia, where we also collaborate with quite a few people. So this is very, very interesting, and one of the benefits of doing research when we don't have a pandemic situation, but we can actually move around and meet people and colleagues with having very interesting meetings and discussions. So this is something that I really enjoy when it's not a pandemic situation. Now we're sitting full-time in front of a computer and discussing with people over Zoom or like that. So doing that, having these collaborations and a strong team. So what I would like to say is that, I mean, the biophotonics area is very multidisciplinary. I mean, we need to do physics, chemistry, biology, medical application, engineering, mathematics, statistics, many, many things that we need to somehow master and do well. And that means that if we have a team that is 40 people strong, then you can have all this expertise within the team. I don't believe in that you have one person that would be an expert in everything. But if you have a team, you can really create those type of expertise within the team. And this is what we have tried to do when building this team from scratch. So this is very important. But also that we do collaborate with people with the various expertise that we need. And we usually work along this ABC model. That means that we need to have academic strong research, so really high quality in the research. We need to have a business involved because they can see what is the future, what do we need to accomplish in order for this to become impactful for the patients and for the medical care. And we need to have a clinician who knows what is the context where this is going to be used when it's ready. So we need to have all of these expertise, and they are not serially connected to each other. They need to be there all the time, all of them. So that means when you design the product already, then you need the clinician and the business persons to be involved in order to make the questions that you're trying to answer as correct as possible and impactful and important as possible. So this is very important, and this is why I think biophotonics is so attractive to work in, because you don't only have one expertise of very similar people working, but you have this range of expertise that you collaborate with, and you learn a lot every day at work, which is fantastic, I think. So saying a little bit about all of that, we also say that, okay, what is the vision? The vision is that we build a team, we mentor people to become even stronger in what they are doing. And one of the main products in any academic team is to produce stronger candidates that can go out and spread the word to industry and other places in the world. So training is very, very important. And then when we're training, we're also conducting research, having world-class research that will also then result in that we can translate that into clinical situations, and we can disseminate that into papers that we publish. So these are the two basic outcomes, apart from the trainees that we're training, is products that we can produce and publish, so that the rest of the world know what we're doing, and we teach people how this is going to work. So that was a little bit of the context that we are working in. So now I will go into a little bit of the research that we are doing. And we are doing a bit of this impactful clinical research where we would really like to translate photonics into the biomedical field so that we can help clinicians and patients, obviously, to work with their diseases and cure them as much as we can, or prevent the disease even better. So I just have a few things here that you can see, fields that we are working in. But you also see this body with all these type of places where you can use light and photonics. And what is red here is what we are working on in our team. So we actually working in quite an area, a variety of fields. And I will just take a few of those and discuss why we are working in those fields and what we are doing and what we would like to accomplish with that type of research. So basically what we would like to do is to take photonics and photonics devices that we can miniaturize and make it clinically available very easily. So if we take example of colorectal cancer, this is one of the most common cancers that we have in the world, the second in men and third in women. And if you see the bar chart here, we have a 5-year survival of about 50%, and it's improving slightly, but not much. And one of the reasons it's improving is actually because we are now performing a screening program for people over a certain age. There is screening every second year or whatever it is, meaning that there is a possibility to find early stage cancers. And once you detect that, so that you typically detect in a global fashion, so you take a fecal sample and check if you have any bleeding or anything like that. So that doesn't really tell where is the tumor, how big is the tumor, or anything like that. So then you need to find that. Find that at an early stage is not very easy. So typically you take an endoscope and then you can go in and look. And what we would like to do is strengthen that endoscopic examination with some type of optical measurements, so guidance with spectroscopy. That could be very compact and doesn't really influence the rest of the measurements or visual inspection with an endoscope, but it means that the doctor can actually see and identify the lesion much quicker. So not only to find it, but also find the extent of it to see the tumor margins that we are looking at. So that's one thing, early detection, early finding of this. The other is to stage it, so stage the tumor to see what type of treatment is required in this stage. So typically, when you find a tumor, you have to define how do we treat it. And typically you say that, okay, we need a surgical resection. Will it be a small incision taking out just the tumor site endoscopically, or will it be a big surgery where you take out maybe 20 centimeters of a colon, which is a very big operation, and it will have long-lasting effects on the patients. So these are the type of decisions that need to be taken. And again, photonics can help in those type of decisions. So what we have done is to study tissue samples with quite simple photonics devices and measure spectra and see how we can differentiate between malignant tissue and tumor tissue, malignant tissue and healthy tissue, normal mucosa. And this is something that we have published this year. So it's an ongoing research. We have more publications to come out. and it's very interesting, and we have very positive results, as you can see. So that's one of the areas that we are working in. So going to a second area that I would like to highlight a bit is brain tumors. So brain tumors is another thing that is kind of important to be able to treat, because this is, let me back up a bit. When you do treat brain tumors, so typically what you start to do is that you drill through the skull to make a hole so you can do surgery, because surgical resection of the malignancy is the best way to start that treatment. So this is clinical practice, that surgical resection you need to start with. But when you do that surgical resection, what you start with is to get through the skull, the bone here, so that you can get access to the brain and take out the tumor. So when you do that, then you need to drill a hole in the bone here, and then you cut out a flap so you can take it out, do the surgery, and then you replace that flap again and have it sealed there, so it's actually secured. But what I will start with is then that drilling procedure. When you drill into the skull here, you would obviously like the drill to stop before it gets into plunges into the brain. And this is typically not a problem. But I mean, just an examination shows that 2/3 of all the surgeons have experienced plunging into the brain with that drill. So there is obviously a need for improvement here. And the improvement would be to see if we can guide that drilling a bit better than it's done today. Now it's a clutch that when you have, as long as you have a pressure here, when you're drilling through the bone, it's still drilling, but as soon as the pressure releases, when it goes through breaks through the bone, then it stops drilling. So it's a mechanical clutch. We would like to strengthen that with optical sensing to guide what we are doing. And that optical sensing means building a system like this, a drill has optical sensors on the drill bit here. So very clever design in order to be able to do that. But then we need to understand, how do we actually guide that type of drilling? It's a very complex measurement situation where you have a drill bit that is rotating very quickly, and it's a harsh environment. And we need to develop that so that we can robustly detect that, and also have a look ahead distance that we can model and say that, okay, so this is computer modeling that we do in order to understand what is the look ahead distance, the red dot here. What is that? How deep can we see behind where the drill bit is to stop it in time before we break through? So that actually is working quite well, and we can see that in this left slide that we actually see that we are just going through the bone. This is exactly the right time to stop the drill, and so that happens quite well, and this is what we're trying to do. And this is not the only application. If we develop this, we can develop it in many other areas of interest. For instance, if you go to the discs in the back of your body and need to secure the discs here somewhere by putting a pedicle screw there, it's very important that you don't break through and go into the nerves or anything else. So you need to be very careful when you do that. And have optical guidance would be very good to do. So now we get back to the brain and say that, okay, brain tumors are not extremely frequent, but still about 2% of all invasive tumors are in the brain. And you see here the survival rate is really poor. And again, the most adequate treatment is to do surgical resection, and then you complement that with radiation or chemotherapy afterwards. But you need to get rid of as much tumor as you possibly can to give the patient as good chances as possible to survive. And this is the tricky part for the surgeon, is really to see where is the tumor. in an MR or CT, you can actually see the extent of the tumor quite well. But when you open here, it all looks very, very similar for the eye. And the question is, can we provide better guidance by using optics to help the surgeon by placing an optical sensor in the surgical tool that they are using when they do the surgery? Then you can potentially do better than they do today. So that's the hope we are looking into. And quite a few people are working in that area and have been working in that area for quite some time, including ourselves. But so far, not very successful. One of the reasons it's not successful enough is because all the techniques that have been developed so far, most of them at least, have been somewhat subjective in the way that you interpret the signal. So we would like to develop something that could be objectively seen. And what we need to do is to combine fluorescence and diffuse reflectance. And the diffuse reflectance is basically used to compensate for the light attenuation in the tissue so that the fluorescent signal that you extract can be converted into concentration of fluorophores in the tissue. And then that would be an objective measure. And that's what we would like to accomplish. So we have built quite a complex system with a number of light sources and a number of detectors. So here are the light sources. We have a probe going into the tissue, and then we have a detector array here or here. And that means that we can measure up to 8 times 8 signal, so that's 64. But actually, all the fluorescence light will be shifted towards longer wavelength. So if you have a certain wavelength here, you can only detect fluorescence on one side of this diagonal here. So you will end up with 36 different channels that you have here. And those 36 channels can be used to extract concentrations of various tissue fluorophores that you have in the body and be able to use to diagnose what is that. And that is meant to be done real time. And what we now have done is to build a very, very compact device. And the idea is to, with micro-optics, and the idea is to make it so compact that you can actually have it in your surgical tool without disturbing the surgeon at all on how to measure and build that. So that's something that we are working on and publishing right now, collaborating with clinicians and industry. So a third project that I will quickly cover is about infants and preterm infants, to be more precise. So preterm infants are the ones that are born too early. So they are not staying in the mother as long as they supposed to. So that means then they are coming out, they are not fully matured. And one of the organs that is not fully matured is the lung. That's one of the organs that develop last, actually. So that means that out of about 15% of all these infants that are born will have an X-ray within the first year or so. And that's quite not so good for them because X-rays is never good. And small children are very, the cells are dividing very quickly and they are growing very quickly. They have a very long expected lifetime before them. So that means that any type of cancerogenous or ionizing radiation damage to DNA can be very, very severe. So we would like to avoid X-rays as much as we can, and especially in these small children. And we would like to then develop an optical way to measure oxygenation and how well the lung function is. So of all of these X-rays that they're taking, actually quite a few of them, as I indicated here, are because of the lung function. So really trying to understand if the lung is functioning as it should. So if we can develop a technique that could replace this type of X-ray scan and be an online monitor rather than taking one X-ray every day to see how this develops, but actually be able to measure online in real time, that would be fantastic. And this is what we're trying to develop, and we are just starting a clinical study. Actually, the contract for procuring the system to do that is actually being signed today. So this is very, very good. And we have an ethical approval to get started to do these type of measurements on these very, very vulnerable infants. But before we got to that point, obviously we need to see that the system and technology that we are developing is working as well as it possibly can. And because of these infants are so vulnerable, we really need to make the best out of it and try to measure something that is so similar to these infants as possible before we start to go to the clinic and really expose these infants for our measurements. And the way to do that is to build tissue optical phantoms, so something that mimic the tissue in optical senses. And we're trying to build them as like the human body as possible. We call that anthropomorphic phantoms. So in order to do that, we take an X-ray or a CT scan actually. So take X-ray of an infant, or that infant will have an X-ray anyway. We take those images and recreate that 3D stack of images and segment all the organs from that. And then we build a tissue phantom that has the right optical property for every organ and build that type of tissue optical phantoms. You can see a fake one here, that will be an infant with the different organs in different colors. But actually they would look like this because they would be highly scattering, so you can't see through them. And you can use that to build these optical phantoms and do the measurements with these type of devices that we are developing. Or you can do simulations of the light propagation and see what is the best, how do you best extract the signals from the line that you would like to see. Very, very interesting research. And if successful, can mean a lot to these infants, we hope. So, okay, so again, a little bit more to the more fundamental part of what we are doing. So we're working with a particle called upconverting nanoparticle. So that's a particle that is really tiny. It's 30 nanometer in size. So it's an optical crystal. So it's transparent basically, but it's doped with some of these ions here, ytterbium and thorium, so rare earth metals. And the idea with this is that you excite the ytterbium with light at 975 nanometer. So that's light that penetrates quite well in tissue. And then you convert that, transfer that energy over to thorium. So that means that you will first go to this state here, excite this, and then the next photon gets in here, you will get that and excite from that state now up to this state. And then you can get a very, very much higher energy in thorium than that input energy will allow you. So you take stepwise excitation in this and can get out 800 nanometer light or 470 or 650 nanometer light, whatever transition you're looking for. And that has quite a few advantages that will be important here. We can use some of them here. You can see this is a contrast agent that doesn't give any background light, because no other fluorophore will react like that it will provide emission that is at shorter wavelength than the excitation light. So that means that there is no competing processes, and that means that all the light that you detect at 800 nanometer will be from that type of upconverting nanoparticles. So that means that you can see much deeper into the tissue, and with much higher contrast, you can reach longer into the tissue than the shorter wavelength light would have done otherwise. That means that you can do PDT, you can do optogenetics. So there are many, many things that we are interested in. We are involved in many of those aspects of it, just because of that we have this very unique contrast agents that we have been part of really developing for this field. So one of the projects that we are working on right now is to do microscopy of histopathology slides to do what we call immunohistochemistry. So that is more than just look at the morphology of the slide, but also try to understand what are the biomarkers on the cell surface of these cells that we are studying. And one of the biomarkers that we are in particular interested in is HER2. So that's a biomarker that is indicative of breast cancer. So if you take a breast cancer pathology slide and stain that with this upconverting nanoparticle staining that we are looking into, and then you can see that biomarker, and then you can stage that tumor in a way that the surgeon or clinician oncologist can say that, okay, this is HER2 positive or very positive and so on. And that means that you can stage these tumors much better and provide a much more personalized medicine for that patient, hopefully much more efficiently than you do today. So that's one way that we can also work in biophotonics, not on the patients directly, but on the histopathology slides, and provide more information than is done today. So that's something that we are working on as well. So the last project that I would like to discuss briefly is what we called combining ultrasound and optics. So in this case, we are looking for both light and ultrasound in the tissue. So if you first just take light, and as you saw yesterday that Sana demonstrated and Marcelo discussed in the presentation, light is heavily scattered inside tissue. So that means when you're shining through a finger, you can't really see the bone. And you can't see a tumor or whatever you would like to see. So that means that light, it has a good contrast. It's absorbed in hemoglobin, for instance, very well. So that means that you can measure how much hemoglobin and how the oxygenation state of the hemoglobin very well in the tissue. But you can't say where that signal is coming from. So the spatial resolution is very, very poor. So this is now good if you would like to see deep into tissue with high resolution. And I mean, this is typically done for, one of the research areas to do that is optical mammography, to try to find tumors in the breast, because breast is very homogeneous tissue. If you see something like that, you can believe that that is a tumor, and that's something that should be treated with. So that's something that's done quite a bit. The alternative that's done today is to use ultrasound. So ultrasound is to have these high frequency sound waves going through the tissue. And then you look at the echo, and when you do that, you get images looking like this. And the contrast here is actually the velocity of the sound. So that means that when you go into a different structure of a tissue, which has, it's slightly harder or have different mechanical properties, that means that the sound propagation will have a different speed, and that means that you will get reflection between one medium and the other medium because of the mismatch in the velocity of the sound. So that is the contrast agent. So that has absolutely nothing to do with molecules. So you can't really see what type of molecules you have here, but you get a fairly good spatial resolution because ultrasound is not really scattered so much in tissue. What we would like to do is to combine the two, to use both light and ultrasound. So take the ultrasound to provide the spatial information and take the light to provide the contrast. And what we do here is that we take an ultrasound, we focus that to a spot here. And then we take light and shine it in, and it goes everywhere. But the light that interacts with the ultrasound focus, there you will actually shift the frequency of the light slightly. So that creates a different wavelength of the light. And if you detect that different wavelength from the outside, you know that that light comes from that spatial region where you have the ultrasound focus. So this is what we call acousto-optics. And that is quite interesting. And then you can actually see both contrast and spatial resolution, which is very, very interesting. But it's also quite challenging. So this is another image of that. You send in the light here, you have a tissue here, you send the ultrasound into a focus here. You shine in with red light, now you get a shifted light, so you have some green light coming out. You try to filter that green light out. Sorry, I should point on this screen here. And then only detect the green light. So the issue with doing that is what we see here. So if we have 800 nanometer frequency of a light or wavelength of a light, that means a frequency of 400 terahertz. So that's quite a high frequency, especially if you compare that frequency to the frequency of the ultrasound, that is about 1 megahertz. So that means that you will have 400 terahertz plus minus 1 megahertz in the sidebands here due to this ultrasound interaction. And that means that the light frequency here, that's the input light, and these are the sidebands due to the ultrasound. And you would like to filter out only this and suppress this one here. This is not easy. One thing is that the delta lambda here, if we use these numbers, will be, instead of 800 nanometer, it will be 800, 0.00002 nanometer. So that's a very, very tiny shift of the frequency because of the light frequency is so much higher than the ultrasound frequency. So you need to have an extremely sharp filter in order to do that. And on top of that, maybe only 1 out of a million will be tagged with this light. You mean all of this light will go everywhere and come around to the camera, but only a small fraction will be tagged in the ultrasound focus. So this intensity here is maybe a millionth of this intensity, and it's that close. And this has been practically impossible to do in the past. And what we are developing now is a technique to be able to do that with an extremely sharp filter that will allow us to do that. But such a sharp filter will also have another benefit, actually. And that means that if you look at the frequency space, we are interested in this guy, trying to suppress these two guys. But when we do the filtering, when we look in the time span, they come in at the same time here, but in this filter here, actually, this one will be delayed, so it will come at later times. So the tagged light will be delayed. It will come at later times than the light frequency light. So we actually have two ways to suppress that light. One is the attenuation due to the filter, and the other is the time delay. And I will now very quickly show you how this actually works. So what we do is that we take a crystal looking like this. So an optical crystal, transparent crystal, but it has an absorption band due to these rare earth metals that we dope it with. So this is the type of crystal lattice where you have some rare earth metals implanted here. And they will absorb light at a specific wavelength. And that wavelength is quite narrow. But because they are sitting in a crystal lattice here, which has slightly different environment, so that means that different ions in that lattice will have absorption at different wavelengths, slightly different wavelengths. And that means that we get an inhomogeneously broadened absorption line when we use that type of crystal. So this is the type of profile that we have. And that may be, I mean, not very wide, but I mean, much, much wider than the filter that we would like to create. So that's basically covering both the light frequency and the sidebands. So this could be at 800 nanometer, if that's the laser wavelength that we would like to avoid. So it can be very, very highly absorbing here. But it would also like to allow light that is shifted by 2 millionths of a nanometer to one of the sides, that would be transmitted. And how do you do that then? You do something calling spectral hole burning. So you take a laser, a very, very narrow laser with high intensity, and illuminate that crystal with that laser. And what will happen then is that you have all, so this is an energy level diagram here. So you have all ions being populated in this state. But now you shine light into, you populate it to the excited state here. And then it goes back and forth between these two states. It has a fairly long lifetime because rare earth metals will have a long lifetime and a narrow band. But there will always be some type of hidden state here that you can also have some de-excitation to. And that can have an extremely long lifetime because that is a forbidden transition. So that means that this is a state that will trap all these electrons here. So they will be excited to this state, and some will go to this state, and they will stay there for a long time. And that means that you soon will depopulate the ground state here, because all the ions will be in that state. And that means that this, at exactly this wavelength where you have a laser light, that will now be transparent because you have depopulated the ground state. And that means that you can create that very narrow filter that is actually defined by the width of the laser. And that could be kilohertz or something. So very, very narrow. So you're using a crystal like that and dope it with rare earth metals in these type of elements. And then you shine light through that, and then you can see absorption due to these dopants in that crystal. And you burn a hole like that and get a transparent window. And that window could be exactly for the frequency that you are interested in. So that means that you could still have very high absorption here and basically zero absorption here. And you can get a very, very high contrast between those. And also because this is such a narrow profile here, what will happen is when you change the absorption profile so quickly due to the Kramers-Kronig relation, you will actually also change the refractive index in that range. And since the refractive index is changing so quickly, the group velocity of the light will also change because that depends on the refractive index like that. So it depends on the derivative of this refractive index as a function of frequency. And since this slope is very high, that means that the group velocity will change quite a bit. And that means that the light will be delayed when it's transmitted through. So the light comes into this crystal, both the tag light and the laser light. And then they go through here. The tag light will have that frequency, and the laser light will have that frequency. It will be absorbed by this very high absorption. This will not be absorbed because the absorption is basically zero here. But this light will also be delayed in time because this is at that slope, while here the slope is basically zero. So that means that you will also have a delay of a tag light. So we get a very, very good contrast. And due to this effect, we can develop acousto-optical tomography to actually work in practice. And we can see down to 10 centimeters deep in tissue and still have a contrast of something absorbing. So this is just a measurement that we did in collaboration with a group in Sweden. And here we managed to see 7 centimeters deep in tissue and get very good contrast, this one versus this one without ultrasound. So that means that we can actually tag a special region in the tissue very well and see that. So that's really fantastic. And that means that in the future, we may be able to see through the body with light with a resolution of an ultrasound, because you can basically see through the body like that. And also very, very interesting is that now we can not only see through the body with light that typically we can't see through the body, but with that type of technology we can. But since the light is very highly scattering, the problem is also that we can't focus light inside tissue. You would like to do that sometimes if you would like to treat the tissue with laser light, for instance. And what we are now trying to do is to use a laser beam expander and this spatial light modulator. So typical mirror that you have in a projector, a light projector, for instance, that is based on this light modulators, spatial light modulators. And that means that you have elements here that you can move back and forth slightly, or get transparency or non-transparency. And that means that you can shape the wavefront coming out from this to not be parallel wavefront coming here, but it can be at arbitrary shape because you have this SLM with a pixel size of a normal camera, basically. So you can have megapixel, and then you can shape the wavefront here as you wish. And with a different wavefront, you can actually get the wavefront that penetrates best and will be focused here inside the medium. So this is really depending on the coherence properties of the light, and acknowledging that you could get a focus inside the tissue if you just get the right input in here. And what we're trying to do that is to use these upconverting nanoparticles that I discussed before that are highly nonlinear in their optical regime. And doing that, you can actually see where you have a focus, because when you have a focus, you get the strongest signal because you have the highest peak power of the light inside. And then you can use that detection, take to a computer to really iterate the best pattern of the SLM in order to get the focus. So this is something that we have accomplished with these upconverting nanoparticles. When we send in light here, we have some type of diffuser here, and then we look in this region here where we have upconverting nanoparticles in a liquid, and just try to see if we can focus the light there. And if we get the focus that we get here, by iterating this SLM, we can actually get that intensity to increase quite a bit. And you can see here the blue light coming out from that upconverting nanoparticles. Here you can't see it. So that's a fantastic way to not only be able to see through deep tissue, but also to focus light inside tissue. So I think we have a lot of opportunities in front of us where we can really try to do things. So the last area that I will try to cover very quickly is to build the world's smallest camera in order to be able to see not only through the tissue, but inside the tissue, any place you can get in with a catheter or even a guide wire that can be as small as 300 microns in size. So that means that we need to have a camera that is sufficiently small and also the cable sufficiently small so that you can put it into the arteries, into the heart, into any place in the body basically, and still be able to see inside that region. So this is something that we have sponsorship from IPIC to do, so the Photonics Center, and basically developing that type of system. And it's based on all the expertise that we have at IPIC, both from the application side, the electronic side, optical components to be able to do light delivery, to illuminate, but also to optical power this, also to have optical readouts, so you don't need a cable from this, but you can do the readout through a very thin optical fiber. And then you need to package everything in a very compact device. We have world-leading packaging capabilities at IPIC. So all of that combined hopefully will result in the world's smallest camera that we can use to go into the clinic and do amazing things that is far from possible today. So with that, I would like to say that, yes, we have a roadmap in front of us. We're doing the research that I mentioned here, a few things from. We would like to expand on this acousto-optics because we think this is really amazing if you can see through the body with light, with the contrast of light that light can provide. So I think there is a great future there. We're going to these micro-image sensors that will be much, much smaller than anything has seen today and not been implemented in medical tools that they can be. And then we're also developing wearable sensors to see what type of sensors will be the future tools in order to have all this telemedicine become that revolution that it has the potential to become. So we are seeing ourselves as really looking at the system level competence and working with these component guys, the preclinical and clinical people, and the companies in order to make impact and world-leading results. And yesterday, someone asked the question, why do we do all of this in Ireland and in Cork? The reason is that medical device industry is amazing in Ireland. It's the second largest in Europe. So about 50% of is exported here. So it employs 25,000 people in Ireland. So this is a huge, huge impact factor in Ireland to do medical device research. And if you also look at the life science companies just in the Cork area, it's amazing. We have many, many of the most important companies in the world in that region. And if you look at the medical device companies, 18 of the 25 biggest medical device companies will be in Ireland, will have a presence in Ireland. And also the technology cluster in Cork is also quite amazing. So it is a very, very good region to be in order to develop this. And that's also indicative of, if you see the population of Tyndall, the people working there, they're from everywhere. I think we have 45 different nationalities. And this is really a metropole for this type of research, really important. And just to say something about what we are doing then, and I chose the year 2019 because 2020 we didn't travel a lot, but these are just conferences that we attend from the team that we have, main training activities. We do a lot of these things. We also very engaged in teaching and doing outreach activities. As you can see from this workshop, for instance, we're trying to really educate many people in the field. We're also part of schools, summer schools. This was the Sigma school that we were part of arranging in Sweden, actually, one of the biggest schools in the world in this type of things. We also been running a summer school in biophotonics since 2003, which has great results, and that resulted in that we could host that Sigma school as well. We are arranging in ions, so that is a student, PhD student or master student, arranging a conference, worldwide conference in Cork. And it was supposed to be 2020, but because of the pandemic, it has to be postponed. So now it's going to be taking off in the fall of 2021. And we are doing a lot of other outreach activities as well. And we're also very proud to go out to schools and so on, and giving outreach activities to very young people in this field. So with that, I would like to finish off and just saying that don't miss the next big seminar or webinar in this field from Brian Wilson. He is one of the really top persons in biophotonics in the world. And we are known and collaborate with him quite a bit. But he is really, really amazing and a really source of knowledge and inspiration. So please don't miss that. It's within a month or so. So with that, I would like to thank you, and I hope that you understood a little bit of this. What is biophotonics? Why do we do biophotonics at Tyndall? What are the opportunities in this field, or are there any? And I definitely say there are. And a little bit of a clinical and fundamental research that we're doing at Tyndall that I think is very, very exciting. And I'm very excited to work in this field. So with that, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
It's a really interesting and exciting presentation, Stefan. Thank you so much.